Have you ever watched a grand illusionist on stage? You're completely mesmerized, right? You know you're being tricked, but you just enjoy the spectacle anyway. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to treat political manipulation exactly like a masterfully orchestrated magic trick. Because according to some of history's sharpest, most cynical minds, politics actually operates on the exact same principles as stage magic. We're going to dissect this grand illusion step by step and expose the absolute mechanics of deception that have been used to control populations for centuries.
So, why do intelligent people prefer beautiful lies over ugly truths? It's super easy to look at history or even modern politics and mock those who get swept up in obvious propaganda. But let's challenge ourselves for a second. Do you ever fall for the comforting illusions of the political stage instead of facing the cold, hard reality? You know, our innate desire for a just, moral, and orderly world is exactly what the puppet master preys upon.
Section 1. The effectual truth. To truly get how this illusion works, we've got to peek behind the curtain. And to do that, we are turning to the ultimate whistleblower of political magic, Renaissance philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli. Now, Machiavelli didn't just sit in a comfy ivory tower writing theories. In 1512, after surviving brutal torture and exile by the Medici regime, he pretty much threw his youthful idealism out the window. He completely upended traditional philosophy. See, before him, thinkers like Plato and Cicero focused on the imagination of republics, basically this utopian fantasy of how things should be, governed by moral authority and persuasion. Machiavelli stripped all of that away. He insisted that to survive, you must look at the verita effectuale, or the effectual truth. This is the raw, factual, and honestly, often ugly truth of how men actually live, which is driven heavily by coercion, force, and deceit.
Which brings us to one of his most famous and frankly chilling conclusions derived from that effectual truth. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. This quote perfectly nails down the clinical, ruthless tone we're dealing with. Machiavelli observed that human affection is fickle, Men will break the bond of love the second it serves their advantage. But fear? Fear is maintained by a dread of punishment that never fails. Ultimately, he argued that even valid law rests entirely upon the threat of coercive force. Authority is practically impossible without the physical power to actually back it up.
Section 2. Fox and Lion Psychology. Okay, so we've established the cold reality of power. But how does the political magician actually pull off their misdirection in real time? Well, they do it through a very specific kind of psychological flexibility. Machiavelli used the metaphor of beasts to describe this dual nature required of a ruler. Older Roman philosophers argued that humanity was defined by lawful conduct, while deceit and force belonged to the beasts and should be totally avoided. Machiavelli flipped this on its head. He argued that a successful leader absolutely must possess the psychological flexibility to seamlessly switch between the cunning of the fox and the violent force of the lion. The fox uses deception to recognize and avoid traps, while the lion uses raw cruelty to frighten off the wolves. You literally can't just be one. The lion is blind to traps, and the fox is totally defenseless against wolves.
But why do they need to adapt like this? It's because of what Machiavelli called fortuna, the constantly shifting, totally unpredictable tides of fate and socio-political conditions. Fortune is unreliable, and in Machiavelli's cynical worldview, men are inherently wicked and will happily break their promises to you. Because of this, a leader has to appear completely compassionate, faithful, and devout on the outside, playing right into our love for beautiful lies while hiding those unscrupulous, beastly actions behind the scenes. If a leader is inflexible and clings only to strict morality when the tides of fortuna change, their fall is absolutely inevitable.
Section 3. Manipulating societal humors.
Right, so every good stage magician has to know how to read their audience. You can't use the lion or the fox effectively if you don't understand the crowd you're performing for. This brings us to a really fascinating concept: societal humors. Now, this was originally a Renaissance medical idea used to describe the fluids in the human body, but Machiavelli adapted it to describe the body politic. He argued that society is not just one unified, harmonious entity. Instead, it's a volatile mix of distinct, deeply ingrained, and inherently conflicting social factions or appetites.
Specifically, he divided society into two primary humors. On one side, you have the great, the elites, the nobles. Their primary appetite is to command and oppress others. Then, on the other side, you have the people, the masses, and their appetite, it's simply not to be oppressed. These two desires are fundamentally incompatible. Machiavelli explained that political regimes are essentially just the effects of this constant, unavoidable clash between these two humors. A brilliant ruler knows exactly how to play these factions against each other, usually by protecting the masses from the elites, which secures the very foundation of their power.
Section 4. The Cesare Borgia Masterclass. So, if Machiavelli wrote the manual, a man named Cesare Borgia gave the masterclass. Borgia had just conquered a region called the Romagna, which was incredibly chaotic and rebellious. He needed to establish order, but he knew that just bringing down the brute force of the lion would make the people hate him. So he applied the cunning of the fox. Step 1. He installed a notoriously cruel henchman, Ramiro de Orco, and gave him absolute power to violently pacify the region. Step 2. Once the region was pacified, Borgia stepped back and just let Ramiro absorb all of the public's bitter hatred for that violence. Then step 3. To show the people that the cruelty wasn't actually his fault, Borgia had his own henchmen suddenly arrested. And one morning, the people of the Romagna woke up to find Ramiro literally cut in two in the public square, with a block of wood and a bloody knife right beside him.
Machiavelli was actually there as an ambassador observing this whole event, and he noted that this bloody piece of political theater left the people satisfied and stupefied. It is a stunning, totally clinical execution of everything we've just discussed. Borgia used a proxy to commit the necessary violence, and then murdered that proxy to suddenly swoop in and appear as the people's savior. Calculated cruelty, when framed correctly to the masses, successfully reset the societal humors and consolidated his power. The people got their vengeance, the elites were terrified, and Borgia walked away looking like he had perfectly clean hands.
Section 5. The Problem of Dirty Hands.
Borgia emerged looking like a savior, but did he really have clean hands? That forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question. Can a good leader actually keep their hands clean, or is doing evil sometimes an absolute requirement for doing good? This takes us out of the Renaissance and straight into modern political theory, specifically dealing with the morality of necessary evil.
Modern political theorist Michael Walzer translated this Machiavellian realism into what we know today as the problem of dirty hands. Walzer argues that in normal times, moral constraints hold firm. But in a supreme emergency, like a situation where the very existence of a community or its way of life is threatened with total destruction, saving that community sometimes requires a leader to consciously and deliberately commit grave moral evils. Think about extreme actions taken during wartime to prevent a total disaster. The leader must do what is morally wrong, knowing it's wrong, simply because the political necessity demands it.
And that leads us straight to the citizen's paradox. It's a really uncomfortable theory that directly implicates us. In a democracy, we demand that our leaders be highly virtuous. But when our safety is threatened, we also want our leaders to crush our enemies by any means necessary. Because democratic citizens elect and authorize the leader to act on their behalf, and because we ultimately benefit from the security purchased by that dirty act, some theories argue we actually share in the moral taint. We can't just point the finger at the politician. By authorizing the necessary evil, our hands get dirty too. It for sure forces you to take a long, hard look in the mirror.
So, are you ready to see the strings on the political stage now? We've stripped away the imagination of republics and stared directly into the effectual truth. We've seen the lion and the fox, the manipulation of our societal humors, and the bloody, dirty hands required to keep the whole show running. The next time you see a politician promising you a beautiful, flawless reality, ask yourself, what trap are they hiding, and what proxy might they be setting up to take the fall? Take off the rose-colored glasses, recognize the mechanics of the illusion, and refuse to be a puppet. Keep learning, keep questioning, and never ever stop looking behind the curtain.